Welcome, colleagues. Welcome back to the office. Welcome to episode number 12. This is the CPE Today podcast, and welcome to our presentation of the hows and whys of creating user-defined functions in Excel, part 1. In today's class, we are going to kick off our first in a new playlist of episodes concerning advanced functionality in Excel. And what more advanced functionality can you get than writing your own function inside of Excel? Now, we're all probably familiar with functions. If you're not, that's the thing when you go into a spreadsheet and you click into a cell and you write equals sum, equals subtotal, equals VLOOKUP. Well, that little bit there, that is a function. What we're going to learn about today is what it means to write our own functions. Believe it or not, Excel allows the user to create their own functions for different calculations that they want to do. So if there's something that you want to be able to accomplish inside of Excel, something that doesn't exist currently, some sort of modification for inventory or calculation for customer records or something like that, guess what? You can write your own function inside of Excel and you can make something from nothing. So in our course, what we're going to look at today is we're going to talk about broadly what user-defined functions are in Excel, how they function, what they work. We're going to actually write one together. I'm going to teach you the necessary steps for creating a user-defined function. Although today is going to be a pretty simple function, you'll be able to build upon this foundation to create more advanced functionality as the playlist and course progresses. We're going to talk about some of the major phrasing, some of the major ways that you might want to write this particular function for your different purpose. But overall, you're going to leave with a pretty good understanding of what user-defined functions are and where you would choose to use them inside of Excel. So today we are going to be looking at a couple of different types of user-defined functions. The one we're going to write together that I'm going to go into pretty good detail is going to focus on creating a function for the day name of a week. Believe it or not, inside of Excel, there is not a function that when you put in a date will tell you, is it a Monday, a Tuesday, a Wednesday, so on and so forth. There are lots of other ways that you can handle it. For example, the one that immediately comes to mind would be to use some of the visual formatting rules inside of the cell format properties. But if you wanted to do it programmatically with a function, guess what? You can't do it. So I'm going to show you how to write a function today to determine the day name of a week. Okay. We're also going to take a look at how you might want to create a function to calculate taxes. So let's say, for example, you build a spreadsheet, you pass in a taxable income and outputs whatever that tax due for that specific period is. So using user-defined functions, we're going to create some functions from nothing, and we're going to create some different ways of creating functions to calculate those specific terms inside of our workbook, and they don't exist. Now, I do want to remind you, if you are a financial professional, and I hope you are, you can earn CPE credit for listening to today's podcast. Head on over to cpetoday.com, use course code UDF1, take a short 5-question exam, and you will earn a credit for today's broadcast. How cool is that? So just by listening to a podcast, you can earn credits to maintain your professional license. It's easy, fast, affordable, and efficient. Please, if you're interested in this, check out cpetoday.com. Use course code UDF1. Alrighty, so without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into our material for our presentation for today. And so, in our first section for today, what I really want to do is just introduce what user-defined functions are. I want to talk about some of the benefits, some of the drawbacks, some of the risks, and some of the rewards that would go into you creating your own function. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and talk about some different ways that you might add this. We're going to switch over to Excel then, and then I'm going to show you some of the specific setup requirements that would come with setting up a user-defined function. Okay. So UDFs, in a nutshell, allow you to create your own custom function and formula to do a specific task. When there's not another formula for whatever purposes you would want to do, and you want to create a custom calculation, well, that's when a UDF would become useful. So if you want to do something specific. Okay. And it's great because UDFs go above and beyond any specific function that's in Excel that you might already have. And so using this, if something isn't exactly right and it isn't working exactly the way you want it, or it's not doing the exact calculation and the methodology that you need for your specific project, guess what? That's when a UDF can step in and be very, very helpful. So there are some specific advantages with working with UDFs that you should be aware of. UDFs allow you to automate complex formula functions. Okay, so most of us have written some formulas inside of Excel before. I would hope so if you're watching this podcast. Well, some formulas are pretty simple. I mean, sums and subtotals, very quickly you'll see that they add things up or do some sort of other arithmetic operation for it. However, often we're working more and more with complex calculations in the sense that we might be doing several lookups, or we might be handling several logical statements, like a big if, for example. Well, an if can feed into another if, can feed into another if, so on and so forth. We refer to that as a nested if statement, okay? Now, nested ifs are fine and what's nice about them is it allows us to be able to handle a lot of different logic all at once. Well, with a user-defined function, we can get a little bit more specific with respect to our logical lookups. And if there's something that we want to be able to calculate that the if can't do, we can do that. Additionally, instead of having a long, complex formula that might drag out and have lots of different nested functions inside of it, what we can do is we instead can write that as a visual basic function, a UDF. And instead of having a whole bunch of nested formulas inside of our workbook, we can call a single user-defined function, and that user-defined function can have a ton of complex logic, but it's handled in the back end. It's handled in the code. So from a standardization procedure, it makes it easy. And we also don't have to write formulas from scratch every single time we're using them. We can call that one user-defined function that has all that complex logic behind it. And so it brings consistency, it brings ease of use. And as we talk about some different methodology of sharing our user-defined functions with other people in our teams, it will bring that consistency, making everybody's life a little bit easier. So that consistency can be really useful as we talk about using something across a whole company. If we're working in accounts payable or receivable and we're doing some sort of aging calculation, we certainly would not want to come into cross where half our team was using one type of calculation and the other team was using a different calculation, maybe a different rate. User-defined functions can be fantastic because it allows us to be very consistent with how that formula will execute. Now, in general, UDFs are fantastic because it brings functionality that would otherwise be beyond the reach of many Excel users. And so often inside of an organization, they will have the Excel guru who will create the necessary user-defined functions for the team, and then everybody will just kind of feed off of that one person's work using Excel add-in functionality, which we'll talk about at the end of our presentation. But it's a great way of being able to do complex things without having to do them repeatedly. You essentially set them up once, and they will continue to operate as far as you need them. Now, as great as UDFs are, there are some issues that we should be aware of with respect to how UDFs operate. So you should know that if you choose to write a UDF, guess what? You can now call yourself a programmer, although a baby programmer, if you will. This is a methodology for programming. UDFs utilize a programming language called Visual Basic for Applications. It's a very long-standing, very tried and true methodology for creating programming within the Office framework. VBA, as it's better known as, is the language that powers a lot of the functionality that you're going to find inside of the Office ecosystem. And so VBA is how we extend and bring new capabilities, for example, to Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, and others. So if you're writing a UDF, guess what? You are a programmer, and you're going to need at least a little bit of working knowledge for Visual Basic for Applications, or VBA. Okay, so you're essentially creating a computer program, which I think is pretty cool. I view it as my life's mission to get other people excited about using programming for all different aspects of life. Programming is not just reserved for the computer nerds anymore. If you can learn programming, you can automate a lot of things in your life and make your life a lot easier in a lot of respects. Now, UDFs on the other side are also bring other functionality to Excel, and that functionality, that custom programming, is not native to the Excel application. Now, that's great because it gives us the ability to be able to do nifty, cool stuff with it, but it also does present to the computer a security risk. And so UDFs are viewed as macros by Excel's security engine, which can trigger some particular security issues inside of your workbook. Now, you and I both know if I'm writing it or you're writing it, it's not going to be a security risk, but the computer can't understand intent. It only sees this is not core Microsoft functionality. This is in fact something that has been added. So just be aware that when you use user-defined functions inside of Excel, you're using a macro. Now, I'm going to show you an awesome way kind of around this using the add-in functionality towards the end of our presentation that will alleviate some of these concerns, especially on a day-to-day basis, but it does not get around the fact that Excel does view this as a macro for the security workbook. As such, in order to be able to use a user-defined function, you either need to save them as a xlsm or an xltm extension for Excel, which is a macro enabled workbook or a template macro workbook or a Excel add-ins. Now, a couple other issues that we should be aware of with respect to user-defined functions. Okay, UDFs are more limited compared to traditional macros. For example, I can't use a UDF to fill in data from one cell from a different cell where that UDF is residing. For example, I can't do a spill function. There are a variety of these dynamic array functions that Excel has added in recent versions, like filter, like unique, like sort, that are spill functions, meaning you write the function in one cell and it will populate several cells around it depending on the data itself. UDFs can't do that. If you write the cell function formula in cell A1, the value will be returned to A1. You cannot, for example, have the UDF in A1 and have it change a cell like in D32. It will only ever change or populate the cell in which it resides. Now, that is different, though, from changing, for example, or including arguments from other cells. So you can, for example, do calculations based off the values in other columns and formulas. You can certainly do other and include that data in your function arguments. It's just you can't change those cells. It's only gonna reside in the cell that it is originally written. Now, UDFs are written in VBA, as we talked about, Visual Basic for Applications. And as I mentioned, VBA is kind of a baby level programming language. It's written right there in the name, Visual Basic. So it's not a high level language, nor can you really do a lot with it outside of the Office ecosystem. So what you should know is because it's kind of a more basic language, it's not very sophisticated. And a lot of the performance things that we would come to expect in modern programming languages like Python or JavaScript even, or preferably .NET or ASP or something like that, it's not going to be as robust. And also it's not going to be as performance driven. So if you start writing a really complicated UDF, just be aware it is going to run a little bit more sluggishly than you will see core functionality in Excel running. Okay. Now, this shouldn't be a problem for 99% of you, but if you're creating very high-end complex UDFs, just be aware your workbook is going to take a performance hit. Okay, last thing with respect to issues. Saving and retrieving UDFs can be a bit awkward. As I mentioned, if you're going to be sharing these with other people, the three preferenced ways would be to save it in an Excel-enabled macro workbook, in an Excel macro-enabled template workbook, or an Excel add-in. But you also have another option too. If you're just going to be using it for yourself, you can save it in what's called your personal workbook, which is the personal.xlsb workbook. Okay, and this will allow the macro to run for you, but it is not going to allow anybody else to be able to use this macro. So just be aware of some of the different ways of getting user-defined functions in or out can be a little tricky. It's not a game changer, or it's not a showstopper, but it is something that we should generally be aware of and plan for. So I would tell you, when you're thinking about your user-defined functions, you should be thinking about distribution. How am I going to be able to share this with somebody else? All right, let's go ahead and go into our first review question. Okay, so which of the following describes the roles of user-defined functions in Excel best? Okay, is it UDFs serve as replacement to traditional Excel functions? Not really. I'm probably still going to want to use sum and subtotal and lookup as needed. UDFs only run inside of macros. Not necessarily. They look like macros, but they're their own thing. UDFs allow users to add custom calculations to Excel workbooks. No, that sounds pretty good. Okay. UDFs cannot contain custom calculations. Nope, that is not the case. They can do whatever you'd like them to be. Okay. And our correct answer here is UDFs allow users to add custom calculations to Excel workbooks. Okay, so that is our correct answer, and that is when and where we would want to use a user-defined function. All right, let's go ahead and talk about creating our first UDF. Okay, now I'm going to describe what I'm going to do here first. For those of you who are listening, I'm going to talk about the different steps that go into this. I'm also going to, and then when we're done talking about it, then I'm going to switch over to Excel, and then we're going to go ahead and create our first user-defined function together. So we're going to talk about it first, and then I'm going to go through and I'm going to actually do this inside of Excel so you can kind of visually see. But I want you to have at least a little bit of an understanding of where and how and the methodology and the big picture of what we're trying to accomplish is. Now, the first function that we're going to choose to write here is going to be the name of the day of the week user-defined function. As I mentioned, there is nothing inside of Excel at the moment from a function perspective that will allow us to pass in a day of a date and get the day name of the week. So I can't, for example, pass in March 2nd, 2021 and get back Tuesday. I can format it that way, but if I wanted to programmatically determine this in some sort of function, guess what? I can't do this. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to do kind of a modification of like a lookup or a choice formula. And very simply, I'm going to write a user-defined function that essentially uses like a lookup or a if statement, something like that, a choice formula that will iterate through the dates and then will determine what day name for that particular date that is. Okay, so to get started with this, we're going to need to go into our Visual Basic editor. Okay, now lots of different ways that you can use this. There's 3 ways that I can think of off the top of my head, but if you're friendly with the computer keyboard shortcuts, you can use shortcut Alt F11. Okay, you can also go up to the development toolbar and you can use it from there, the developer toolbar, and you can also go down to the worksheet itself and grab it from there as well. So I'll show you all 3 methods when we go to do this here in a moment. Now, we're going to be creating our code inside of a module inside of Excel, okay? And with modules, this is where the functionality and the user-defined function actually is. And we can have several different functions inside a single module. And a module is kind of like a container for code. So we'll go up to the modules menu. We're going to go ahead and select insert. We're going to select a new module, and we're going to go ahead and insert it. Now, when we originally do this, without sort of saving it as a separate macro-enabled workbook or a template workbook or an add-in, we're going to be adding this formula to our personal workbook. And so if we create this formula, as we will here in a moment, unless we do something different with that, it's going to be inserted into our personal workbook. Now, if we want to save it into a different workbook, we can certainly do that as well. Okay. Now, the actual like layout of the Visual Basic for Applications window, you're going to think, man, did I, pass out and wake up in 1996? And the answer is you probably did. The work screen that we're going to be using here is actually quite limited. It's been around a long time. I'm going to say Microsoft really kind of hasn't improved or changed this in, I'm going to say well over 20 years at this point. And you'll find that the menus, the layout of this all looks the same as it did 20 years ago. And you're right in that particular matter. It is just about the same. So from here, there's lots of different menus that can be selected. I'll walk you through a couple of the main one here is for the VBA application itself. But ultimately, what we're going to do is we're going to choose our personal XLSB project, and we're going to choose to insert a module from there. Now, the actual code that we're working with, we'll dive into in a little bit greater detail here in a minute. But as I mentioned, this is a very simple formula. It's not intended to kind of stretch the possibilities of user-defined formulas, but really just to kind of give you a general familiarity with respect to how this user-defined function operates. Okay, so there's a couple key terms here. There's the word function, for example, that lets Excel know that, hey, we're working with a function. You'll see there's a function name, and then there's also some parentheses here. Okay, that's the name of the function as well as the arguments. Okay, we'll go into greater depth here in a moment as we kind of walk through several of these steps in terms of creating this function. But what I want you to realize when you're creating a function is that there's a specific syntax in order of operation. There is a methodology for writing user-defined functions for them to work a specific way. So it's not just an open-ended process. All programming is structured in some capacity. And it all works a little bit different. VBA, this is how VBA looks. You declare what you're doing, the name of what you're doing, the arguments of what you're doing, plus the operations. But in other programming languages, let's say SQL, for example, you have different vocabulary, you have different words, you have a different way of asking that question or performing that operation. So as you start to learn programming, you should realize there's two big pieces of this. There is the understanding how programming occurs, understanding the thought process of how you take a specific task and you break it down into a program of some sort, and the way you will execute that program. And that's pretty standard in terms of like how I would approach this program. But every language has its own way of doing it. It has its own syntax. It has its own order. And if for example, a language, you can then use that knowledge that you've already acquired, and you can go and learn a different language pretty easily, because the core foundational pieces of this are all the same. So this is what VBA looks like. And at this point, why don't we go ahead and switch over to our screen share. And why don't we go ahead and quickly just talk about getting into the developer space, getting into Visual Basic for applications, and some of the security things. I'm going to show you the Trust Center for Microsoft Excel, because it's a good place to know. All right, so let's go ahead and switch over here to Excel, and let's take a look at our workbook. Okay, now I do want to remind you, if you are taking this course for CPE credit, and I hope you are, with your purchase of today's course, you will also get the sample materials that I'm working with here today, and there are two sample files. Okay, there's the main sample file that we'll be looking at, the hows and whys of user-defined functions in Excel, and I also have another sample file, functions by color. In this particular one, I teach you, for example, how to use the color and the background color of a cell to be able to do calculations. So probably not going to be able to take a look at this at this time, but if we get some time towards the end of the presentation, we will go ahead and do that. But still a pretty cool formula and function, and you get both of those that you can go ahead and try. Okay, and I do want to point out, unless you have macros enabled and you've got these workbooks open in such a way that they're considered trusted, you should be aware that you can get errors with user-defined functions. If you see up here, for example, when you go to run some of these functions, if it's not a macro-enabled workbook, you'll get this pound name ref, which means that, hey, there is not a formula here that I recognize that I can execute here. So if you get that name pound question mark, that just means like, hey, what you doing? I don't get it, but I'll show you that here in a little bit. Now, that I'm using is the hows and whys of user-defined Excels. And if this is a trusted workbook like it is, you can write a new formula like DAYNAME, for example, and you can get that to execute and run, as we can see here. So that is the difference between kind of a enabled workbook and a non-enabled workbook. That will be a big determination whether or not your functions will execute. Okay, so what I want to show you first and foremost is the developer toolbar, which you'll notice is missing up here. And then I also want to show you the Trust Center, because both of those have a big impact on where and how macros are enabled, how you get to them, and then also some of the advanced functionality that comes with it. So to get to this, what we're going to do is we're going to come up here to the File menu on the upper left-hand corner. Okay, from the File menu, we're going to go ahead and click down here to Options. Okay, this is going to bring us into our options for Excel, and all the main stuff inside of Excel is going to be listed in here. So for example, if you choose to want to change your default font, or let's say you want to change your background template or theme or your name or anything of that nature, this is going to be where you're going to choose to change those settings. Now, there's also two other components on the left-hand side of this. There is the add-ins and the Trust Center. Okay, remember those two menu options and where they are. They're very, very useful. Additionally, you'll also see there is an option that says customize ribbon. Okay, so let's go take a look at the Trust Center first. Then we're going to come back to look at the add-ins, and then we're going to come back to look at customize ribbon. Okay, we'll click the Trust Center here, and then we'll click the Trust Center button that's going to be on the right side of this because Trust Center actually opens up in another screen. Okay. Now, the Trust Center is how and where your Excel workbook is going to trust particular documents. And there's lots of different trusts that you can have. You can have trust from a particular publisher. You can have trust in a particular location. That would be, for example, like, hey, always trust this stuff in my C menu, in my C drive or my D drive or on SharePoint or something like that. Or specific documents. Now, the reason we have trust and the reason these things exist in the way that they do is because macros by their design can be quite dangerous to the user's computer. Now, what do I mean by that? Macros run with the same permissions of the user. So the computer can't tell the difference between Steve running a macro and a macro that just happened to be inside of the computer. It just sees that the user is doing something. Macros run with that same level of permission. Now, the other thing about macros that you should know is that macros inside of Excel can affect the computer in general. It's not limited, it's not sandboxed only to the Excel application. And that's what makes it dangerous. So we have our macro settings on the left-hand side here. And from these macro settings, we get a couple of different options for this. And the reason we can disable macros or only enable them from certain places or otherwise be careful with them, or at least know that they exist, is because they can run like they are us. The computer sees that the macro is doing something, but it can't tell the difference between the macro and the user, and the fact that it can go external to the application. So when you hear people, for example, tell you don't enable macros or don't open macros from people you don't know or something that's sent to you by email, they're absolutely valid because you could download an Excel workbook with malicious code inside of it. And that malicious code could do things like a data breach or otherwise negatively affect your computer. Now, inside of this macro settings, what my personal recommendation is disable all macros with notifications. What that gives you the ability to do is that by default, when the Excel workbook opens up, it will tell you, hey, there's a macro inside of this workbook. What do you want me to do with it? And if that macro opens, so let's go ahead and open this again. Okay. The hows and whys of user-defined functions here. It's going to give us a little thing, or at least should give us a little bit of thing up here that will tell us that, hey, there is a macro enabled. I think I've already trusted this one, so that's probably why it's not popping up here. But generally, that's where you would see that warning. It would pop up as a ribbon layout here, and it would require you to click yes, enable macros in order for this to run. Okay, so if you can't ever get your macros to run, more often than not, it's going to be over here in that Trust Center, and it will be because you have disabled certain documents, or you will have changed your macro settings to disable macros from even running. Okay, so that's that right there. And generally, if you just do this once, like I did with this Excel workbook, it should just run for you and it should continue to trust. Okay, that's the first thing. Okay, second thing I want to show you is the add-ins. Now, the add-ins is going to be where all the other Excel functionality lives. And there's a couple of different types of add-ons here. There are Excel add-ons, which is what we're going to be working with today. There are COM add-ins, actions, XML expansion packs, and then your disabled items, which is just stuff that's been disabled. Now, the Excel add-ins, if we go over here and we can click go, this is going to be where it's going to show us other functionality that is available inside of Excel but not currently on. Okay, the analysis tool pack and the analysis tool pack VBA, for example, here, these are kind of like macros. These are enhanced Excel statistical analysis. And so if we wanted to, for example, enable this one, or let's say the solver add-in, and click OK here, those will turn on additional functionalities inside of Excel. Now, when we create user-defined functions and we save it as an add-in, that's where we're going to go to turn that on. Okay. Now, for the solver and the analysis tool pack, when we turn those on, if we come over here to the data tab, you'll see here on the far right side, data analysis and solver as being those two options that have been added here. And these are fantastic if you're looking to do statistical analysis. For example, you could do things like regression testing, rank and percentile, random number generation, F testing, covariance, correlation, ANOVA, all different types of advanced statistics can be done right inside of Excel. Okay, the third thing I wanted to show you in the options menu, let's come back over here to File, drop down here to Options, and go ahead and select Customize Ribbon, is the ability to be able to turn off different menu items inside of Excel. And you'll notice by default, the developer toolbar is disabled. Now, I wish Microsoft didn't do this because there's so much great functionality and shortcuts built right into this menu. Now, if we turn on this ribbon menu and we click Save or OK, you're going to notice we get a new menu item pops up. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, now we have the developer toolbar. In this, you'll see we've got a couple of new work groups, code, add-ins, controls, and XML. And so this is where we can add a lot of advanced capabilities to our workbook right in here. You know, for example, if you've ever opened up an Excel workbook and it's had, you know, like a button, for example, you know, this has been how they've added that button, you know, to do something. It's been through this developer toolbar. Or if you've ever been inside of an Excel workbook and you've seen, for example, they've got drop-down menus that are not data validation. Well, guess what? That is through the developer toolbar. Now, from the developer toolbar, we also get the ability to open the Visual Basic for Applications editor here. We can also record macros if we choose to do this. This functionality is also the same on the View menu on the far right over here. So it's the same thing. And we can also access all of our different add-ins, including our Excel add-ins, as I mentioned ago. Okay, this is, for example, from the Microsoft Store, but we can add in our Excel add-ins if we'd like, and we can also access our COM add-ins right from here too. So very powerful to know where it is. Now, we want to go and we want to write our first user-defined function. We want to go ahead and write our user-defined function that is going to determine the day name of a particular date. And this is the function that we're going to write. Now, what we need to do in order to be able to do this is that we need to access that Visual Basic for Applications editor. Now, there are three different ways that you can do this. You can use the computer keyboard shortcut Alt-11, which will pop up the editor for you. Okay, right here. You can access it by coming over to your developer toolbar and clicking the Visual Basic button. That'll also bring it up. But usually the way I end up interacting with this is going to be down here with our tab for the name of the worksheet. We're going to right click on this and we're going to go ahead and select View Code. And that, whatever way you choose to do, is ultimately going to open up our Visual Basic for Applications editor. Sometimes this is referred to as an IDE or Integrated Development Environment. Okay. Now, this integrated development environment, IDE, is going to contain all the features and functions and tools and all the things that I need to use to create not only a user-defined function inside of Excel, but also a macro. So if you're looking to, for example, get really sophisticated and really good with macro design, you're going to need to get really familiar with this application. This is how and where we do that writing of code. Now, this sample file already has this data set up here, and we can actually come on over here. If we look on our left hand side, we'll see a listing of our open workbooks as well as other projects and other add-ins that have been enabled. And if we scroll down here to our hows and whys of user-defined functions, you'll see we have a modules listing here. If we click inside of module 1, we are going to see a listing of all the code for the function that we are writing. Okay, and so here is our first function for what we're going to choose to do. Okay, and so we're going to write this together, and I'm going to explain this function to you in depth. Okay, and there's some other ones in here too. So if you download the sample file and you'd like to, try out some of these, you certainly can. So there's a function here to count words in a specific cell. There's a function here for those of you who are reporting on fiscal year. You know how frustrating it can be trying to determine fiscal year when everything in Excel is calendar year. Well, guess what? I've given you a user-defined function that will do that automatically. Okay, and there's also some other functions up here to determine taxable tax owed for a particular tax year based off of filing status. So we've got one for married filing joint, married filing separate, single, head of household. There's some samples inside of that Excel workbook that'll work well. Now, our formulas, we're going to go ahead and write these into a separate module here, just so you can kind of see them written hand by hand, one by one. Okay, and generally what we would end up doing if we were in a brand new clean workbook is that we would either go to our personal XLSB workbook, okay, or we'd open up a new macro enabled workbook, and then we would choose insert, and then we would choose module, okay? And in doing so, it's going to go ahead and give us a module that we can choose to write our formula. Alrighty. Now, I'm going to do my best to go slow. I'll do my best to zoom in so you can kind of see how each of these function lines are written. But what I'm going to go ahead and show you is writing that function day name in order from start to finish. Now, I personally recommend every time that you're going to get started with writing a function, you include comments that talk about when you wrote that specific code, what that code is supposed to do, the date, things that are going to be relevant later on. I will tell you, undocumented code is very difficult to be able to navigate, understand, learn from, and correct. Do yourself a favor by writing some comments. Now, Excel comments are very simple. All we have to do is just use a simple apostrophe, and you'll see as I start to write these functions, I will include comments as I'm writing them so that people, myself, a colleague later on would get a sense of whatever the heck I was trying to do. And so if they're trying to debug it, they're trying to fix it, writing some comments about what we've done will be very helpful. Now, to get started with our function, we're literally going to write the word function like this, okay? This tells Excel that whatever I'm going to do after this, I want it to be a function inside of the application. And I'm going to go ahead and hit space. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to give this function a name, and this would be whatever the name of the function we choose to use inside of Excel. So when we do the equals function name, this would be whatever we would call that particular function, okay? So if we wanted to call it day number, day name, day of the week, something of that nature, as long as it doesn't conflict with an existing function inside of Excel, we're good to go. And so we're going to go ahead and call this one day name like this, so I can follow along with the examples that I provided. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to tell Excel whether or not this function also includes any arguments. Okay, so arguments are things that we use inside of Excel formulas all the time. So for example, VLOOKUP takes 4 arguments: what you're looking up, what you're looking up to, what you want back, and then whether or not to do an approximate or an exact match. Okay, subtotal takes 2 arguments: function number, and then wherever you're choosing to do that operation. Well, day name is going to take a single argument, and that single argument is going to be and we're going to call that single argument date number. Okay. So we'll type in date number here, and I'm going to go ahead and do a closing bracket like this, and I'm going to hit enter. Now, you notice as soon as I hit enter, 2 things happen, okay? The first thing that happened is that function turned blue. What's nice about Visual Basic for Applications, this editor, as well as many other sophisticated editors like it, it will highlight specific keywords and syntax language so that we get them correct. Okay, so it tells us that we are in fact using a function, and because it turns that word blue, it's a reserved keyword. Likewise, you'll notice at the end it added the term and function, and so the function is everything between the word function and end function. Now over here, we're going to go ahead and give ourselves a tab. Tab will give us some space. Ideally, when we're working with user-defined functions, having some visual separation between elements can be quite helpful in debugging and understanding what we're doing. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to declare another variable, and we're going to say day number. Okay, and notice this is not the exact same thing up here. We have essentially 3 variables now: the name of the function, the argument, and now we're declaring another one. So the day number is going to be equal to the weekday function of the date number argument. Okay, and notice when I was in this, let me just go back up a little bit here. Notice that when I write an existing function inside of Excel, like we are here, like weekday, okay, we can use existing Excel functions inside of our UDF, okay? And so what we're going to do here is weekday, we're going to run the weekday function on the date number argument. So in a nutshell, we're setting the variable of day number equal to the function result of the weekday function against the date number argument provided. Now, the weekday function, if you're not familiar with it, it does a very simple thing. It returns a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, a 6, or a 7. And Sunday returns a 1, Monday returns a 2, so on and so forth. And so what we're saying is we're going to pass in a date, okay? Then we're going to take in that date, and we're going to run the weekday function, and we're going to get a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, a 6, or something else back from it. All right, so that's what the first part of this function does. And functions run top to bottom. So that is going to run first, and then it's going to run through everything else. Now, let's go ahead and write ourselves a little comment here. And let's say this UDF is used to return the day name for a particular date. Okay, we're going to hit enter. Notice when I hit enter here, notice that comment turns green. Comments are always green, and for Visual Basic for applications, they're best indicated with by a apostrophe. So if your comment is not green, then you know that you didn't add that apostrophe, and Excel is going to treat whatever you write there as part of the program. Okay, if it's commented like this, it gets ignored by default. Okay, comments are never in part of the runtime execution of the actual formula. It's just there for the benefit of the person. Now, I will typically put my name in here, so I'm going to say SMY, and we're going to go ahead and say the date 03/02/21, and we've added a nice comment. So if somebody after the fact is like, who the heck wrote this? Well, now they know it would be me, and if it's a small enough organization, hopefully they'd be able to interpret my initials, and if not, they can go ahead and, I guess, Google it. Now, the next part of this is going to be the meat of the application. What we're going to do here is we're going to write a select statement. Now, a select statement inside of Excel, inside of a user-defined function, and a case statement is kind of like a big if, for lack of a better way of saying it, or a switch, or a choice, or something like that. And so we're going to say, oops, let's take off caps lock here. We're going to go ahead and say select case. Okay, case basically is like again, that lookup, that choice, okay? And we're gonna look at our new variable that we declared, day number. We're gonna say day number like this. Okay, now what we're gonna do, and notice when I hit enter there, it turns blue again, okay? And what we're gonna do here is now we're gonna run through the different cases, okay? Well, what happens if it is 1? Well, in case scenario 1, what I would want it to return back is Sunday. Okay, so we're going to say day name equals Sunday. Now, real quick, running through this, okay, we pass in a calendar date to this formula. That calendar date, the date of whatever it is, okay, gets the weekday function. That's going to return back a 1 to a 7. And then down here, we're running through the different cases. So if it's returning back a 1, we'll return back Sunday. If it, for example, returns back a 2, set day name equal to Monday. Okay. If it's a 3, set day name equal to Tuesday, so on and so forth. I'm just going to go ahead and I think we can all hope I know my days of the week now. And I'll just go ahead and paste these in here just to make it a little bit easier. Now, what we've done here is we've given it every possible scenario. And so again, this isn't intended to be comprehensive in the sense of like how powerful UDFs are, but just to kind of give you a general sense of how they function. And so with this, we give it a specific calendar date. And from that calendar date, we're able to determine whatever the day name of the week might be. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to come on over here and we're going to say end select, so that it knows that select statement is over, and we have now officially written our function, okay? So let's go ahead and switch back over here to Excel. And let's go ahead and take a look at how that formula executes, okay? So with this, we've got our day name equals C4. And now up here, if we change this from 11/14/2027, okay, we would see that that is a Sunday, for example. And let's go ahead and put in 03/02/21. We'll see, oops, give me 1 second here. Let me just clean up my code a little bit because I only want to run one formula here. Let's try that one more time. We see that we in fact get our Tuesday. Okay. The reason I got that error was because I had 2 formulas named day name. Okay. So remember, you can only have the name has to be unique inside the application. Okay, so if we put in tomorrow, for example, we'll put in 03/03/21, we will see we get a Wednesday. Let's see what Christmas might be this year. So we'll say 12/25/21. Christmas is on a Saturday this year. All right, that's great. Let's see what New Year's of next year, 01/01/22. Well, again, that would be a Saturday, so we know our functions are correct. But what we've done here is we've created something from nothing. We've created the ability to be able to do a calculation that would otherwise be out of the reach of other Excel users. Now, user-defined functions can be useful for a lot of different things. I've got another one here in our sample file, but unfortunately we will not have time to go through it today, talking about income calculation. And in a nutshell, what this does is that it takes a taxable income amount, okay, does the necessary calculations based off of AGI, and will then multiply it by a specific tax rate, and will tell you what your tax owed is based off of the taxable income presented. So imagine you're a Jackson Hewitt or an H&R Block or a Steve's Accounting Services or something like that. You could have a quick Excel workbook that could quickly help you estimate taxes for a client without having to do a full-blown tax return. Alrighty, let's go ahead and have our second review question for the day. Okay, which of the following is a potential issue associated with user-defined functions? Is it user-defined functions require at least minimal knowledge and work Visual Basic for applications? Is it UDFs are viewed as macros by Excel and as such can trigger security issues? Is it user-defined functions are limited in comparison to traditional macros? Or is it all of the above are potential issues with UDFs? Okay, and in my opinion, I would go ahead and say all of the above are potential issues. So just be some things that you should be aware of as you're working with user-defined functions is that, hey, they are viewed as macros, they can have some limitations, and you do need to have some programming knowledge. But those should not be things that limit your ability to be able to utilize user-defined functions in your work. I think all of these are things that you can work around. Okay, so for our last section for today, I want to talk about how we can make user-defined functions a little bit easier to use. Okay, now in order to be able to use user-defined functions, we need to be able to share those functions ideally with other people. Now, when we go to save and share this workbook, we're traditionally, for example, having to save it as a macro-enabled workbook. Okay, now again, macro-enabled workbooks are complicated and they're going to cause security issues. If we go and save this and we pop it up, it's going to pop up security things. And additionally, any functions we use are going to be limited to that Excel workbook. It's going to be limited to whatever macro is in that xlsm. But what if we want to use it on other workbooks, but not make those other workbooks macro workbooks? Okay, so there's some issues that can pop up here. Now, the other way we can handle it is to save it in our personal workbook, in our personal XLSB file. But what happens if we save that and then we share it with somebody else? They're not going to have access to those user-defined functions and it's not going to work for them. So we have to think of some different ways to be able to handle this. Okay. Now, regardless of where these macros are stored, it's going to be some sort of challenge. Now, what I'm going to propose is probably something a little out there from left field, is to use the Excel add-in functionality. And what we want to do is actually save these user-defined functions as an Excel add-in and then share that Excel add-in file with our colleagues. They will install that add-in file and then they will have access to whatever user-defined functions we use. Now, this sounds complicated. Trust me, it's actually pretty easy. And once you know the specifics of it, you won't have any problems. So what we would do, and here's the general methodology that I'm going to promote with this. Okay, you write and you kind of have all of your functions, user-defined functions in a single workbook, and you'll call it whatever you want. So it could be, for example, the name of your company, add-ins. So like Devmatics add-ins, something like that, and so whatever functions I would expect my team to be able to use, rather than sending them the code or letting them kind of copy and paste it or left to their own devices, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new workbook. I'm going to save that workbook as a add-ins file. Okay. And then I'm going to distribute that add-ins file to them. Okay, so to do this is pretty simple. You open up a new workbook, you do all your coding in that workbook, you save your user-defined functions in that workbook, and when you're happy with it, you go to the File menu, you choose Save As. Okay, the traditional Save As dialog box is going to pop up. You're going to drop it down, and you're going to choose the option Excel Add-in. And you're going to save that under a recognizable name, custom functions, Devmatics functions, your company name functions. And you notice when you change this to the Excel Add-in type, a new folder is going to pop up for it. It's going to be called the Add-ins folder, and you'll see it's in your directory. Okay, now once you've saved it, then what you can do is that you can enable it in the add-ins section that I showed you previously. And once it's enabled, guess what? Now it's an add-in inside of Excel, and you can use it for all of your workbooks without having to enable macros across every single workbook. And once it's been saved in this particular manner, all you have to do is just email that or put it on your shared drive, send it out to other people, enable it, and then they have access to those features and functions as well. It's very, very simple to be able to do. Let's go ahead and switch back over to Excel, and let's look at how we might change our workbook here from being an xlsm workbook, okay, an xlsm workbook to an Excel add-ins. Now, I've got several different functions in this workbook that in our company would be very useful for everybody to have, and I want to make sure that Alex and Alicia and Alana, all of us are using the same code to determine the day name for a particular date number, or more often than not, we're calculating the same fiscal period for a specific date. Okay, and so I've standardized that into how I want that function to run. Now, all I have to do is come on over here to the File menu in the upper left-hand corner. We're going to choose Save As. And we're going to go ahead and just save a copy of this workbook. And instead of being an xlsm workbook, we're going to drop this down, and we're going to choose towards the bottom, probably about 5 or 6 from the bottom there. Okay, we're going to choose the file type of Excel add-in. You'll see it's an xlam file, xlam file. Okay, I'm going to choose that here in a minute, but I also want you to notice this. Notice how it says the path of where it's being saved. Right now it's saving to my S drive. When I change this to an Excel add-in file, notice it changes the path, okay? It goes to the C directory, the users folder, the name of the user, in this case, CPE today, the app data, roaming, Microsoft add-ins folder, and it will drop that add-ins that we've created here. It will put it into that directory, and that's where Excel wants to go look to find Excel add-ins, okay? Now, to prove that this is a brand new add-in, we're going to go ahead and call this UDFs podcast. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and click Save. All right, so we've gone ahead and saved that. Let's go ahead and absolutely close out of Excel. We'll close out of our other sample workbook here, which is our summing colors and counting colors by background color and cell color. Okay, and let's just go ahead and just open up a brand new Excel workbook. Okay, and we'll come in here and let's just go ahead and write in equals today. Okay, and we get our name or our date. Okay, and if we type in day name, you'll see that there is no function for this. And if I go to run it somewhere else, we get that pound name question mark, meaning that formula doesn't exist, or it's not enabled, or it's in some way not capable to be executed. Okay, now how do we do this? Didn't you say, Steve, you save it as an add-in, then you can go ahead and use that formula and function inside of Excel? And the answer is yes, you can, but you need to enable it first. Now, to enable it, we can go, if we've enabled our developer toolbar, if we come up here, you'll see under add-ins, Excel add-ins listed, okay? But if you don't have your developer toolbar enabled, again, where you would go to enable this, come on over here to the File menu, drop down here to Options. From Options, go ahead and select Add-ins. And from Add-ins, go ahead and select Manage Excel Add-ins and click that Go button. Either way, this is a lot faster if you've got your developer toolbar enabled. And you'll notice we've got our UDFs podcast. It's the one we just created here. We're going to go ahead and give that a click. We'll go ahead and click OK. Now it's going to go and load that add-in. And if we come on over here to day name, you'll notice now that is a function, listed, we can go ahead and point it to our 3/21/21, and in fact, we get back a Tuesday. How cool is that? And so that is the most effective way of being able to share and disseminate user-defined functions with other folks inside your office. And it's actually very simple. And if we created another workbook, for example, and we put in another date, let's just randomly pick something, okay, from the past even, day name, we'll see it works even in that new workbook as well. So creating user-defined functions, sharing user-defined functions are quite simple, very easy to be able to do. And this is just the first of many podcasts I hope to do, kind of discussing some of the more advanced capabilities that you can do with user-defined functions. It's endless. Now, if you're interested in continuing this, please stay tuned to this podcast. We're going to have other advanced Excel topics, including more on user-defined functions and macros coming in the future. If this just piqued your appetite and you want to learn a little bit more, here are a bunch of other resources that are provided in the materials where you can go and learn more about how user-defined functions work and some of the really kind of cool things that you can do with it. All right, that does bring us to the end of our podcast for today. Let's go ahead and have our final review question, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up for the day. Which of the following statements is true regarding saving a user-defined function as an add-in? Is it when saving user-defined function as an add-in, you must save it in your personal macro workbook? You can. When saving a user-defined function as an admin, you must save it as a module. Well, it should be a module already. When saving a user-defined function as an add-in, you must activate it before you can use it. Yes, that's definitely something you need to do. When saving a user-defined function as an add-in, it will only be available in the workbook that it was created. No, it will be available in any workbook where the computer has that add-in enabled. And so the correct answer here would be the third one. When saving a UDF as an add-in, you must activate it before you can use it. So what did we go ahead and learn today? Well, we learned a lot of new stuff. User-defined functions are not new. They've actually been around a long time. However, it's a very underutilized feature in Excel, and it's great for doing those custom calculations and providing, some sort of way of doing a formula that would otherwise be out of the reach of most users. And so we looked at some different ways of creating user-defined functions, and we also talked about some different ways that we can share those user-defined functions with other people on your team. Now, in future podcasts for this, we're going to look at some more advanced examples of using user-defined functions. I'm going to give you and go in depth, for example, on that user-defined function for color and counting and summing. I'll also show you some other examples of user-defined functions for doing things like inventory and sales and customers, things of this nature. And lots of reasons to use this. I mean, ultimately, we're trying to help you be better and faster and more efficient and concise, and user-defined functions are a great way of getting to that point. Now, as a reminder, if you are a financial professional, and I hope you are, you can earn a CPE credit for listening to today's podcast. It's very simple. Again, go to cpetoday.com, use course code UDF1, take a short 5-question exam, and you will earn a certificate for completion with a CPE credit to your name, and you will be well on your way for continuing your education and maintaining your license for the year. If you like today's broadcast, please consider following us on social media. You can find us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and others. In most places, we are at cpetoday.com. Also, please consider liking, subscribing. We'd love for you to leave a review on wherever you happen to be listening to this podcast as well. And stay tuned. We have so many more great presentations coming up here. We have another presentation on Excel tables,